to HR Unbox, the podcast where we take HR out of the back office and put it at the center of the business strategy. Hey there, I'm Mukesh, your host. I'm having over 10 years of experience into HR world, and this is episode 1, where we are going to talk about where HR is no longer back office. It drives a strategy, culture, performance, and growth, turning people into a company's greatest competitive advantage. Let's get started. Evolution of HR from back office to boardroom. Let me take you back to early 2000s. Picture a typical HR department, stacks of paperwork, payroll spreadsheets, policy manuals in binders. HR was efficient, organized, necessary. But strategic? No, not really. In many companies, HR wasn't in the room when big decisions were made. They were brought in afterward, like we are expanding into Asia. Great, HR, figure out hiring. It was reactive. If a team needed 10 people, HR recruited back. If there was conflict, HR mediated. If compliance rules changed, HR updated policies. But shaping business direction, that wasn't the expectation. Then the tech boom changed the narrative. As the tech industry exploded, companies like Google started showing the world something different. They weren't just building products, they were building talent machines. Google began investing heavily in data driven hiring, people analytics, and leadership research. The famous Project Oxygen study analyzed what made managers effective. That was revolutionary. HR wasn't just processing employees, it was studying performance drivers. Talent became a competitive advantage, and the company started realizing something more powerful. Innovation doesn't come from a process manuals, it comes from people. Suddenly, hiring wasn't administrative, it was strategic. Retention wasn't optional, it was survival. HR slowly began shifting from personal management to human capital strategy. During digital transformation era, then technology reshaped HR itself. Recruitment moved online. Professional platforms like LinkedIn transformed how companies are found and evaluated talent. HR systems evolved into sophisticated HRIS platforms. Data became accessible. For the first time, HR could measure time to hire, attrition rates, engagement levels, performance trends. Companies like IBM began investing in predictive analytics to anticipate employee turnover. Think about that shift. HR moved from reacting to resignations to predicting them. That was a turning point. Now that around 2010, there was a war for talent, a new phrase that dominated boardrooms, the war for talent. Skilled professionals had options, culture became visible, transparency exploded. Platforms like Glassdoor changed everything. For the first time, candidates could read employee reviews before applying. Employer branding became critical. Take HubSpot. Instead of hiding culture internally, they published their culture code publicly. They didn't try to look perfect. They aimed for clarity, and that clarity attracted aligned talent. HR had to start thinking like marketers. Attracting talent wasn't transactional anymore, it was a strategy. In 2020, HR had a defining moment. The pandemic was arguably the biggest catalyst in HR's evolution. Overnight, organizations shifted to remote work. HR had to manage many things like health and safety protocols, remote workforce transitions, mental health support systems, digital onboarding, layoffs, and restructuring. Companies like Microsoft rapidly transitioned to hybrid models, guided heavily by HR strategy around flexibility and employee well being. HR leaders were suddenly central to crisis management. Executives leaned on them because people's strategy became survival strategy. Organizations with a strong HR leadership adopted faster. Those without it struggled. For many companies, this was the moment HR moved firmly into the leadership sphere. In today's HR modern world, HR is expected to be strategic advisor, data analyst, culture architect, change leader, workforce planner. Organizations like Society for Human Resource Management emphasize that HR leaders must understand business models, financial metrics, and long term capability planning. HR now influences organizational design, leadership pipelines, diversity strategies, skills based hiring, future of work planning. It is no longer about managing employees. It is about designing systems where performance, engagement, and business outcomes align. Big transformation happened in 20 years. If we zoom out, the shift over 20 years look like this. From administrative to strategic, then from reactive to predictive, from policy focused to culture driven, from support function to business partner. And we are not done yet. AI, automation, workforce analytics, and human centered leadership design will push HR even further. But one thing is clear, HR is no longer sitting outside the boardroom. It is helping shape the future of work, and perhaps the biggest shift of all. HR is no longer just about managing people, it is about unlocking their potential strategically. Let's look into the detail why HR must sit at the leadership table. Let me tell you a story. In 2013, a global technology company was aggressively expanding into cloud computing. The strategy looked brilliant on paper, market demand was rising, investors were optimistic, but internally, the culture was competitive, siloed, risk averse. The company was Microsoft. When Satya Nadella became CEO, he didn't just change product strategy, he changed culture. He didn't do it alone. HR was deeply embedded in that transformation because Nadella understood something critical. You cannot execute a new strategy with an old mindset. HR redesigned performances. They shifted leadership expectations. They embedded the idea of a growth mindset into talent development. That wasn't admin work, that was a strategic partnership, and it helped transform Microsoft's market position and internal. Now imagine another scenario. Our leadership team announces we are expanding into three new international markets next year. Exciting, but here is a real question. Do you have leaders ready to relocate? Do you understand local labor laws? Do you know the talent availability in those markets? Do you have succession pipelines at home? Where companies expand without aligning people capability, execution suffers. Take Uber in its early hypergrowth phase, the company scaled aggressively across global markets, but rapid expansion without a strong people systems led to cultural breakdowns, leadership gaps, and reputational challenges. Eventually, a cultural reset became necessary, and Boo played a key role in rebuilding governance, leadership frameworks, and internal culture. HR leadership. Because growth without people alignment creates instability. There is a persistent myth. HR doesn't generate revenue, but let's look at engagement. Research from Gallup consistently shows that highly engaged teams outperform others in profitability, productivity, and retention. Who designs engagement systems? Who shapes the performance management? Who drives the leadership capability? Only one answer, that is HR. Consider companies like Southwest Airlines. Their strong culture and employee focus have long been credited as competitive advantages in a challenging industry. When employees are engaged, customer experience improves. When customer experience improves, revenue follows. That is not a direct impact, that is business impact. Now let's talk about risk. In 2017, a series of internal cultural issues at Uber became public, damaging its brand and investor confidence. What followed? Leadership restructuring, cultural overhaul, governance reinforcement. This wasn't just PR recovery. It required systematic change, hiring practices, reporting mechanisms, leadership accountability. HR isn't just about hiring. It is about preventing organizational failure. When HR sits at the leadership table, they ask, what is the people risk of this decision? What is the succession risk? What is the retention impact? Prevention is always cheaper than crisis management. Let's talk about change in the organization. Can we change anything without people strategy? Let's look into this. Organizations like McKinsey and Company have reportedly highlighted that transformation initiatives often fail because of people-related factors. Resistance, lack of buy-in, leadership and misalignment. Let's look at Microsoft's transformation. The shift to cloud wasn't just technical, it required mindset change, collaboration across silos, new performance metrics. Without HR shaping that transition, the strategy could have stalled. Change management is not an operational add on, it is a leadership discipline, and HR is central to it. Let's talk about culture, which is not a soft, but it is a strategy. Here is another powerful example. When Netflix built its freedom and responsibility culture, it wasn't accidental, it was intentional. HR partnered closely in designing hiring standards, performance expectations, and feedback systems that reinforced that culture. They were clear high performance, high accountability. Culture became a filter, attracting aligned talent and repelling misaligned fit. That clarity strengthened execution because culture determines how strategy is lived daily, and HR designs the system that shape culture. Let's look into the reality of the corporate world. Finance manages capital, marketing manages brand, operations manage efficiency, but HR manages capability. If leadership is deciding where to grow, how fast to scale, what markets to enter, then someone must answer. Do you have the leadership bench? Do we have the skills? Do we have the culture to sustain it? Without HR at the table, strategy risks to become theoretical. With HR at the table, strategy becomes executable. So HR doesn't need a seat at the leadership table for prestige. It needs it for precision because in today's world where talent, agility, and culture determine competitive advantage, people strategy is business strategy, and leaving HR out of a strategic conversations, that is not just outdated, it is too dangerous. Let's look into that why HR is a driver of business outcomes. Let me start with a scene. It is a boardroom meeting. The CEO is reviewing quarterly numbers. Revenue is flat. Customer complaints are rising. Two senior leaders just resigned. CFO says we need to cut costs. COO says we need operational efficiency. CMO says we need a stronger branding. And then the CHRO speaks. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a capability problem. And that changes the conversation because behind every business metric, these are people. How hiring decisions that change outcomes? Let's go back to early 2000s at Google. Google was scaling fast, but leadership noticed something interesting. Some teams were massively outperforming others. Same resources, same products, different results. Instead of guessing, Google's HR team invested in people analytics. They studied hiring patterns, they analyzed what traits predicted high performance, they refined structured interviews, they reduced bias. The result? Better hiring accuracy, higher performance consistency, stronger leadership pipelines. That wasn't admin HR. That was business optimization. Because when you improve hiring quality, you improve revenue potential. One high performing engineer can build a feature that generates millions. One poor leadership hire can destroy a team's output. Hiring is not a transaction, it is business lever. Now let's look at Microsoft. Before Satya Nadella became CEO, the culture was often described as competitive and siloed. Teams competed internally, collaboration was limited, innovation slowed. When Nadella stepped in, it didn't start with product changes, it started with mindset. A shift toward a growth mindset culture. But culture doesn't change because a CEO gives a speech. HR redesigned performance systems. They shifted evaluation criteria. They emphasized collaboration over internal rivalry. They embedded learning into leadership expectations. Over time, innovation accelerated, cloud revenue grew, market value surged. That culture shift wasn't separate from business outcomes, it fueled them. Let's see how engagement that impacts the bottom line. Let's talk about airlines. The airline industry is brutal. Tight margins, operational complexity, high stress. Yet Southwest Airlines consistently stood out for customer loyalty and employee engagement. Why? Their leadership, in partnership with HR, built a culture where employees are felt valued and empowered. When employees are engaged, they treat customers better, they solve problems faster, they go the extra mile. Research from Gallup shows that highly engaged teams outperform others in profitability and productivity. That means engagement is not a feel good initiative, it is a financial strategy, and HR builds the system that drives the engagement. Let's talk about retention as profit protection. Now imagine this scenario. A fast growing startup loses three senior engineers in the same quarter. Product launches are delayed, remaining team members are overloaded, recruitment costs a spike. Turnover doesn't just hurt morale, it drains profitability. Companies like Netflix approach this differently. Their culture emphasizes high performance and clarity. They are transparent about expectations. They focus on hiring carefully and managing out performance decisively. HR systems at Netflix are tightly aligned with the business performance goals. The message is clear: right people, right fit, high clarity. That alignment reduces performance trap. Retention, when aligned with the business needs, protects the revenue stability. Role of data into the HR world. Uh, Now let's fast forward to modern HR tech. Platforms like Workday allow organizations to track real-time data, attrition trends, performance and distribution, skill gaps, workforce forecasting. Imagine a leadership meeting. Instead of saying, I think morale is low, HR says, high performer attrition has increased to 12% in 2 quarters. Exit interviews show limited career progression as the top reason. Now the conversation changes. It becomes actionable, as strategic, measurable. That is not support work, that is a decision intelligence. Hidden truth of corporate world. Every business outcome you see on a financial report is powered by people. Revenue growth, sales capability, innovation, engineering talent, operational excellence, manager effectiveness, customer satisfaction, frontline engagement. HR designs, hiring systems, leadership development, performance of frameworks, culture reinforcement mechanisms, workforce planning models. So when HR improves those systems, they improve business outcomes. Let's look at the story behind the numbers. Here is what often happens. A company celebrates record profits. What you don't see is the hiring strategy that improve talent quality, the leadership coaching that reduced the turnover, the engagement initiative that boosted productivity, the culture shift that enabled innovation. Behind every metric is a people decision. And behind every people decision, you know who there is? HR. HR is often seen as overhead, but in reality, HR is infrastructure. Infrastructure that determines how well a strategy executes, how strong leadership performs, how resilient culture becomes, how sustainable growth is. When HR aligns hiring, engagement, retention, culture, and workforce planning with business goals, HR becomes a growth HR, not a support function, because people strategy isn't adjusted to business strategy. It is business strategy. Let's look at how aligning people's strategy with the business strategy works in corporate world. Let me take you back to 2014. Adobe made a bold decision. They were moving from selling boxed software to subscription-based cloud model. On paper, it was a brilliant business strategy: recurring revenue, customer lifetime value, digital scalability. But here's what most people didn't see: that shift required a completely different workforce mindset. Sales teams who were used to closing large one time deals now had to focus on long term customer relationships. Product teams had to think continuous updates, not version releases. Customer support had to scale dramatically. This wasn't just a pricing change, it was a people transformation. And HR had to align the workforce with the new business reality. They redesigned sales compensation models, they redefined performance metrics, They invested in change management and capability building because if they had kept the old incentives, the strategy would have collapsed. Revenue model change, people model had to change too. That is alignment. Let's look at another example when a strategy moves faster than talent. Uh, Uber grew at a lightning speed, global expansion, new markets, massive hiring. The business strategy was aggressive scale, but people systems didn't evolve at the same speed. Leadership pipelines weren't mature. Cultural guardrails weren't strong. HR infra lagged behind expansion. And eventually, that misalignment created internal and reputational challenges. What was the lesson? Growth strategy without people strategy creates instability. Speed must be matched with a structure. Ambition must be matched with capability. Aligning people strategy with business strategy isn't just about headcount planning alone. It is about asking if we want 20% revenue growth, do we have sales capability? If we are expanding globally, do we have cross cultural leadership aspect? If we are digitizing operations, do we have the right technical skills? If we want innovation, does our culture reward experimentation? These are not afterthought questions. They must be asked when a strategy is being designed, not after it is announced. Here's what the best organizations at the start. Business strategy defines where the company wants to go. People strategy defines where it can actually get there. When they move together, growth becomes sustainable, transformation becomes smoother, execution becomes realistic. When they move separately, friction increases, morale drops, strategy stalls. At the end of the day, strategy doesn't execute itself. People do, and aligning people's strategy with the business strategy, that is not an HR initiative, that is a business survival skill. Let's look at key metrics modern HR should track. Let me paint a picture. It's quarterly executive meeting. The CFO is presenting revenue numbers. CEO is talking operational efficiency, and the CMO is sharing customer acquisition costs. Then CHRO speaks instead of saying, "We hired 120 people this quarter." She says, "Our time to hire dropped by 20%. Quality of hire scores increased, and high performer retention improved by 8%. That directly supported a 15% revenue growth in the enterprise segment. Now the room leans in because HR just spoke the language of a business. That is the power of the right metrics. Let's look at metric one. Let's start with hiring speed. At Google, leadership once discovered something surprising. Then hiring process, famous for being rigorous, had become too slow. Top candidates were accepting other offers before Google could finish interviews. HR analyzed the time to hire data and realized long processes weren't improving hiring quality anymore. So they streamlined interviews, reduced unnecessary rounds, focused on structural assessment. What was the result? Faster hiring, no drop in quality, stronger talent acquisition in competitive markets. Time to hire wasn't just an HR metric, it was a talent competitiveness metric. Let's look at another metric, quality of hire. Let's talk about quality of hire. Imagine hiring 200 people quickly but half underperform. That is not growth, that is future turnover. Google again invested heavily in people analytics to understand what traits predicted success. They studied performance data, compared it to hiring assessments, refined interview questions. Why? Because hiring the right person once is cheaper than rehiring twice. Quality of hire connects the recruitment directly to business performance. And when HR tracks new hire performance ratings, promotion rates, retention of new hires, they're tracking future key productivity. Another metric is a turnover, the hidden profit rate. Now picture this. A fast scaling tech firm loses a 5 senior engineers in 1 quarter. Product deadlines slip, knowledge disappears, recruitment costs rise, morale drops. That is not just an HR issue. That is a financial issue. Research from Gallup consistently shows that high engagement reduces a turnover, and increases profitability. At Microsoft, leadership closely monitored engagement and attrition during cultural transformation under Satya Nadella. Why? Because cultural shifts can increase uncertainty. Uncertainty can increase attrition. Tracking voluntary turnover, especially among high performers, helps organizations catch problems early. Turnover is not just a number, it is a signal. The big shift in modern HR isn't about tracking more data. It is about tracking the right data. Not how many training sessions did we run, but did training improve performance? Not how many hires did we make, but did those hires that drives the growth? Every revenue number, every innovation breakthrough, every operational improvement, behind it, there is a people decision. And behind that decision, ideally, there is a data. When a chart tracks hiring quality, engagement impact, retention risk, cost implications, a chart doesn't just report numbers. A chart tells a story of organizational performance. And when a chart tells that story in the language of a business, it stops being the soft function and it becomes a strategic growth engine.